Welcome everyone, my name is Richard Cook. This is ZBrush Basics. I created this tutorial series in order to help the beginners just now getting into ZBrush. Maybe they don't really know what to do. There are tons of resources out there for ZBrush. There are tons of resources like ZBrush Central and Digital Tutors and all those other sites. But I decided to do this tutorial series kind of as a way for people to just get into it and be able to figure it out in a quick manner. And I'm also doing this for free for those people, because getting on YouTube and finding ZBrush tutorials outside of very specific ones is very difficult from my experience. You can find specific task tutorials on there pretty easily, but there's really not a beginner series or anything like that on YouTube that's really easy to find. So I'm trying to achieve getting that done so that everybody can get to ZBrush and get it going right away and not have too many problems with it. So to start out, we're going to start part one with navigation and menus, and we're going to get right into it right now. So when you first start up ZBrush, you're going to see Lightbox right here. This is Lightbox. I'm using ZBrush R2 for R2, and when you first start it up, you're just going to see Lightbox right here. And what Lightbox basically is just your kind of subfolder, like your directories and for your projects and tools and brushes and all that stuff. We'll get into that a little bit later, because I'm going to show you the basic functions right now. So you can just click the Lightbox button right here and get rid of that. Now you have a blank document right here, and basically the first thing you're going to want to do right off the bat is you're going to look at your tool window. In your tool window you'll have all the tools that you have open. And in ZBrush they are called tools, not OBJs, not meshes. You can import them as OBJs or meshes or several different kinds of formats, but in ZBrush it's considered a tool, a Z tool to be more specific. So anyway, you have your tools right here, and to simply draw out your tool, just left click, and you can hold shift or something if you want to have the axes symmetrical or anything. And then once you have your tool drawn out here, you're just going to click edit, or you can also press the T key to do that same thing, and we have a tool ready to sculpt on in our edit view. Okay, well there's a lot more to it than that, so just keep with me. To navigate around your tool, you can left click anywhere in the area as long as it's not on the tool. If you click on the tool, you're just going to sculpt on it. Okay, don't want to do that. So you're just left click anywhere outside of the tool area and you'll be able to rotate around it. Okay, to pan, just hold Alt and left click anywhere outside the area of the tool. Pretty simple. Okay, now here's the tricky one. To zoom, you're going to hold Alt like you're panning, except once you're left click down, just release Alt, and this allows you to zoom in and out of the object. Now it's a little tricky at first. If you're just now doing this, it's a little tricky, a little difficult, but once you get used to it, it's really, really easy to move around. Okay? If you happen to be in a situation to where your tool takes up the entire document, obviously you can't navigate around it or anything, because you can't be clicking on the tool whenever you're trying to navigate. Just make sure to click outside of these document bounds right here. Okay, you'll notice they're turned off whenever you're not in edit mode. You have to be in edit mode for those to come up, so make sure that you're in edit mode and just click outside, and then do the same thing, the same keystroke actions for zoom. Hold Alt, left click, let go of Alt, and then zoom out. Pretty simple stuff. Okay, over here on the right we have our tool menu. This is going to show all the various tools you have open in your scene. Okay, And right here, any of the tools that you select or that you hover over is going to have a little pop-up box next to it. And this pop-up box is important. It tells you all the info about your tools. It tells you the polygon count, the point count, and the hidden polys and points also. And it tells you the tool name, of course. And this is important because later when we get into sculpting, you're going to want to be able to tell how many polygons your mesh is up to. Depending on your hardware limitations, that can be a very important number right there. So it's always a good thing to occasionally check this dialog box and pop up and see how high your resolution is. Okay. You also have the option of shelf customization. This is your shelf right here. Just click and drag outside of any of these menus to scroll up and down. Okay. This is the divider right here. This is going to show you exactly how to open and close your shelf palettes. And some people like to use the entirety of the document. That's some people's preference. You also have a left shelf over here. And by default, you'll have the tool menu in there, and you'll have the other menus closed when it opens. You can just open those by clicking on any of them. Now to customize your shelf, if you don't like this palette for whatever reason, or you don't need it or don't want it there, you can just click this little guy right here, drag off, and it disappears. Okay? If you do that by accident, which I do sometimes, you can just go over here, we'll find the tool menu, and then just click that same icon, except the icon's going to be on the other corner of the menu now. Just click that same icon and drag it over onto your shelf, and there it is again. Pretty simple stuff. Alright, so now I'm going to show you the default tool menu that opens up whenever you first open up ZBrush. It's usually the first thing you're going to see over here on the shelf palette. And it is what it is. It's your basic functions for importing, exporting, and loading your tools, and just keeping check of your entire tool area and everything. And so the first function I'll show you here is load tool. Click on that. Okay, now load tool is your Z tool loader. It is for ZTL files. That little extension right here is .ztl, and the difference between that and usually what you're going to export is your like OBJs or something like that. The difference between that and the Z tools are the Z tools are saved out of ZBrush. You can also export your OBJs out of ZBrush, but whenever you save a scene or something within ZBrush, it's going to save out as a Z tool. So if you want to load a tool that you saved out of ZBrush from earlier, it's going to have that extension on it, and that's what you'll load. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and click this one right here, load that tool, and we'll draw it out. Left mouse click, of course, jump into edit mode, and there we have a tool loaded. Okay, pretty simple stuff. Go back. Alright, and then here we have our import. Now this is for your other exported meshes, maybe something you exported out of Maya or out of Max or out of some other program. And currently the export options you have for importing certain formats, it's going to be GoZ, which is that's an in ZBrush thing that goes between ZBrush and your other applications. We don't have to worry about that right now. It's kind of a special tool, special feature, so don't worry about that for right now. What you want to worry about is these other four formats right here. Okay, OBJ is the most universally accepted one. Most other programs have an OBJ exporter or export to OBJ by default, so that's the one you're most likely going to see a lot. You also have your Maya file, Maya ASCII, MA. You can save those out of Maya, of course. Mesh ASCII, which is usually comes out of in-engine meshes. A lot of engines that I use the .mesh extension, and then the mesh binary file, which is pretty much the same thing. So it's just going to depend on what your exporter is and what you're using to have your files exported out to that. So we got plenty of OBJs in here. We got a mesh also, obviously you can see. So we're just going to open the OBJ, and it says the topology of the mesh has changed. Basically what this means is that if you're opening it over a tool that's already there, instead of clicking on a new tool and then importing it, it's basically telling you that the topology has changed. And we're just going to go ahead and accept yes, because it's not going to mess with our old mesh or anything like that. Okay, see that got there, imported just fine. You see it came in as the low poly though. Okay, when it came as the low poly, that's what it was talking about when it said the topology had changed. So it's going to import the low resolution of the mesh. So we'll click off there. Alright, over here, save as. Okay, we have this one open already. Let's draw it out. And again, see, I'm checking right here. You see where it says polys? It's 2 million polys, about 2.25 polys, 2.25 million polys. And that sounds like a lot. If you don't really know what it means exactly, it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't within ZBrush. If you export it, that's going to be a very large file, especially if you like export it to OBJ or something. It's going to be a very large file, and it's usually not really what you want unless you're going to be baking into a lower polygon mesh or something like that. So 2.2 million, that's kind of high. I'm just going to go ahead and drag it down. I already had subdivisions on this. This is one of the tools I made. So I dragged it down to the lower subdivision. Don't worry about the geometry menu. We'll get into that later. And dragging it down to the lower subdivision, it's now only 35,000 polys. That's a little more manageable. So go ahead and export. Hit the export. And that's going to export it to any of the formats of your choice here. Of course, you only have those basic ones. OBJ is the most universally accepted format, so go ahead and export it to OBJ if you do that, and then just click save, and you'll be able to save it to whatever file name you need to. So click cancel there. Save as is the same thing, kind of in conjunction with the load tool. It's going to save out your scene. It's going to save out the Z tool. It's going to save this guy out as the ZTL extension, which we'll be able to open in ZBrush later if we need to. Okay, click cancel, simple as that. Now we have the GoZ menus. Okay, what GoZ basically does, I'm not really going to show you because it's a special task. You need to set up your external applications with it, and there are plenty of YouTube tutorials on how to set this up. So I'm just going to glance over it real fast. I'll explain what it does. Basically what it does is it enables you to jump between your applications in using the mesh that you currently have active. So if I have this active right here, what it's basically going to do, clicking GoZ, is it's going to go to my GoZ enabled application, in this case Maya, and it's going to export this mesh and import it into Maya all in one fell swoop. Pretty cool stuff. Makes it real easy, so you don't have to go through the export and then import in Maya later on. It just does it all in one action. So it's a pretty cool thing to have if you're if you need to improve your workflow or anything. So just keep that in mind. Go ahead and look up YouTube tutorials on it. It's really helpful if you can get it set up right. So moving on, this is your clone right here. Pretty self-explanatory. Clones your subtool. Pretty easy. Make Polymesh 3D. Now, when you're importing something, you don't really need to worry about making it a Polymesh. If you import it as an OBJ, it's already an editable mesh. What Make Polymesh 3D does is it turns the mesh into an editable mesh. It turns it into something you can sculpt on. So I returned that into Make Polymesh 3D. Let's turn this right here. That's already sculptable. You see that? When it says to enable sculpting, please convert this 3D primitive to a Polymesh 3D by pressing the Make Polymesh 3D button in the tool palette. That basically means it needs to be converted into a sculptable mesh. So you can do that by simply clicking Make Polymesh 3D, and now you can sculpt on it. You don't usually have to worry about that if you build your base mesh out in Maya or any other application. You can just import it, it'll already be editable. So you don't have to really worry about that too much if you do it outside this application. But there are plenty of uses inside the application if you're gonna like start from scratch or something. It's a pretty easy thing to just click right there and it's ready to go. Clone all subtools, again, pretty self-explanatory. Click that, that's gonna clone every single one of these. So you have duplicates of all of them now. Not a lot of instances where you're going to really need to do that, but it's there if you need to do it. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how to use Lightbox. Basically, Lightbox is just your navigation, how you can get around the subfolders or whatever, any folders that you're keeping your projects in, or any brushes or anything like that. And when you first click on Lightbox, just click that button right here, bring up Lightbox. Your root folder is going to be the ZBrush 4R2 Z Projects folder. That's the default folder that it opens up to. And you have your just basic subfolders in there. It's just like using Explorer or anything like that, but within ZBrush. It makes it a little easier to navigate for projects if you keep them in the ZBrush folders. And also other things like the tool button right here. This has the default tools that come with ZBrush. When you first open up ZBrush and you go into Lightbox, you can just pop one of these guys up or something like that. Like, let's turn that off. You go into your Lightbox here, and then you go into that folder, the tool folder right here, and then you can just open up the default head or something. That opens it up in the palette there, and then you can just draw it out. And it's good to go. So you can do that with any of these tools right here. This folder also holds like examples for the newer tools in ZBrush, like Shadow Box and the Z spheres and all that. You can have default tools if you want to mess around with those. They're pretty cool also. So definitely look at some of the tutorials on YouTube or something about those tools. You got your brush menu in here too. You can go through and choose different types of brushes. When you first open up ZBrush, by default, the brushes are not all going to be in there. Like, these are all the default brushes that are going to be on the shelf, and some of the Z brushes that you want to use, but they're not going to be in there. So if you want to use them, they're likely going to be in this brush folder here, and then you go to any of the subfolders, like slash is as far as I know, that's not in there. Let's see. Yeah, /3 is in here by default, but I don't really like /3. I like /1. I want to use /1, so I go into my Lightbox, click on the brush, and then go to navigate to that folder, which is going to be the slash folder. And just double click on that, and then double click on the brush, and it's ready to use. And then the other thing too, you have your textures in here. You can store textures in here and use them for whenever you're texturing your object or painting your object or something like that. You have your alpha list in here too. This is pretty important. You're going to use alphas a lot, likely. It doesn't look like I have them all in here. I have my alphas in a separate folder, I believe. But if you keep them in this library, this is where they'll be. And you can just pick them right off the bat and then draw them right out however you need them. You keep your materials in here too. And the other things too, like noise. And these are all basically just pre-saved materials and noise things that you can use to apply to your mesh whenever you need them, or you can create your own and save it out and it'll be in here. So that's Lightbox. Pretty easy. You just click there and it's good to go. Click off, just like that. So here we're going to go next to our top shelf buttons here. This is the top shelf. You're going to use this a lot also, so just remember all this stuff. You'll notice right off the bat that it's cut off right here, and it's not usually like that by default. That's going to depend on the monitor size you have. Unfortunately, I'm doing this on a 19-inch monitor, so it's not giving me the full resolution, and so I have to click off that divider just to see the rest of my top shelf, which really sucks, but I'm going to work with it, and I'm going to try to get you guys to work with it too. So I cleaned up the tool palette over here so it's a little bit easier to manage and things don't get too messy. But anyway, going over the top shelf in more detail, we're going to start over here with the Projection Master button. Now what Projection Master basically is it allows you to drop the tool onto the canvas, onto the background, and draw or paint or sculpt over it, and basically drop all that detail onto the mesh. And it allows you to be able to get in more details and things like that that you wouldn't normally be able to get in. But we're gonna go over that. We're gonna skip over that because we're gonna learn about basic navigation right now. Learn how to navigate over the interface. You can check that out in the extra tools chapter of this, the last chapter. We'll go over that a little bit more. And we're going to do the same with Quick Sketch, skip over it. And basically what Quick Sketch is it's a 2D tool within Zbrush, and just allows you to sketch out your ideas and stuff like that. And so we'll skip over that. And going over here to the edit button, we already kind of know what this does, but to go a little more in depth, it basically just simply allows you to go into the 3D realm and sculpt, do whatever you need to do into the 3D realm. It just basically puts you into that realm and allows you to take advantage of those features. So turning edit off, and just click it, or again click the T key like it says there. Click the T key. You turn on draw mode here. It turns on by default. And draw mode basically allows you to draw whatever tool you have. It's the same thing as when you first open it up. You're just drawing these tools or whatever. And some people like to do that if they finish a tool or something. Maybe they're making a piece of art or something. I don't know. But it just allows you to drop your mesh onto the canvas. Now go and move it over here. The move tool right here. This is basically going to allow you to move your mesh around the scene. Right now I think I have symmetry on, so I just turn that off. It gives you a kind of handlebar, some kind of widget or something that you can take control of, and then thus move your mesh around the scene. It's a little high res right now. Let me turn down the resolution of the mesh. Maybe it'll make it a little easier to move around. So yeah. And it just basically allows you to move your mesh around in 3D space just like you would any other modeling application. But sometimes if you have multiple tools and you want to move like a piece of armor or something onto, like a helmet or something onto his head, position it in place within Zbrush, this is how you would do it. You would select it and you would move it. Scale, again, self-explanatory. Drag your handlebars over your mesh. And you'll notice, like, if you drag it over forward, it's going to try to orient it to the forward part of it. So sometimes you won't really want that. Sometimes you'll want to orient it to the side, but it's going to stay on the left, obviously, if you do it that way. You can solve that by using symmetry. We'll go over symmetry a little more in depth in the next lesson. So we'll just use that, and you can grab your handlebars, scale it. You'll scale it uniformly if you select that middle handlebar right there. You'll scale it upwards if you select the top handlebar, and then downwards, of course, if you select the bottom one. And you can use this to kind of form your mesh if you want to stretch certain things out or something like that. it's useful in a lot of ways, especially if you combine it with masking or something, which we'll also get into at a later lesson. Rotate, click on that. Again, self-explanatory. It's going to rotate it, and you'll notice it rotates based on where you put the widget at. Now, if the bottom's here or the bottom's here, doesn't matter. Whatever handle you grab, it's going to go from the opposite point. You can see there he's kind of ringing around like a clock. Rotate in the middle here is going to rotate him uniformly on that axis. Pretty simple stuff. Not much else to that. Okay, now moving over here, go back to draw mode. You'll notice that if you move or go into scale or rotate or anything like here, the rest of your buttons are going to get grayed out because they're useless. Pretty simple. So click back on draw mode, and that's going to re-highlight all these buttons right here. And move on to the next one here. mRGB, RGB, and M. Now, we're going to get into this a little more when we texture, because this is what it has to do with. It has to do with your texturing with your materials. mRGB stands for material red, green, blue. Your red, green, blue channels, and in Zbrush your material channel. RGB, red, green, blue, your red, green, blue channels, obviously, and M just stands for material by itself. These come in very useful to know whenever you're texturing or whenever you're putting materials on your mesh, or filling your mesh or with color or anything like that, using it with masking or anything like that. Basically anything that has to do with texturing, you're going to want to know which one of these are on and why they're on and all that. Okay. RGB intensity, again, that's with texturing. It's basically the same thing as like opacity in Photoshop. That's your slider for that right there. Z intensity, that's your sculpting pressure. That's your sculpting intensity. That's going to basically tell your brush how intensely it's going to be sculpting. So if you have it set to something really high, it's going to be like a big chunk of clay on the front. Where if you bring it really low, you can kind of subtly bring up your forms and stuff like that. So that's also a very, very important thing to keep in mind whenever you're sculpting. Z add and Z sub, which is Z subtract. That's basically just what your brush is doing. If you're adding, then you're raising the surface. If you're subtracting, then you're bringing it back. Pretty self-explanatory. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and click this divider off. Usually I can work between this, it's not a big deal, but I'll turn this divider off so you see where I'm going with this here. The focal shift is going to determine that little inner circle in your marker here, your brush, your sculpt marker. Okay, this little inner circle is your focal shift. Obviously by default it says 0, and you shift it up, you shift it back, that circle's going to change size. And what basically that does is it determines the sharpness or softness of your brush. So if you did it real sharp, you're going to get a really, really sharp outline on that. If you did it really soft, then it's going to have a fade and there's barely going to be any outline at all. So bring that back to 0. Your draw size, self-explanatory again. Just allows you to change the size of your brush, just like in any other painting or sculpting application. Alright, and so if you're in the middle of this and sometimes you maybe not want to go all the way up here just to click something or look for something that you're going to click off, you can control your basic brush functions by holding the space bar. You hold the space bar, it's going to bring up your color palette, it's going to bring up some of your tools, it's going to bring up the material in the alpha, and it's going to bring up the basic functions with the draw size and the focal shift, the RGB intensity, and all that stuff. Usually you're just going to use this to make quick changes to your draw size or to your focal shift or RGB intensity or Z intensity. So you don't have to go up here. It's the same exact thing, but it's a workflow thing, and so going to allow you to just jump right in. If you need to change your size or something, jump right out, and then jump right back in again. Alright, so going over the sidebar here. Get this guy on here. Going over the sidebar, I'm going to start up here, the BPR icon right here. BPR stands for Best Preview Render. And what this basically does is give you a kind of good quality render of what your tool will look like, with shadows and all that kind of nice stuff rendered into it. So we'll go ahead and turn this back up to high res, so it's got the higher subdivision level on it, and click BPR, and it's just going to use the settings it has, default settings that it has right now, to make up a render. Give it a second, and there you go. You'll see got shadows and everything now. I got a little more finer details kind of popping through, softer lines, softer silhouette. And so it's just good if you want to like render out something to kind of get an idea of what you're gonna have with the sculpt and everything, what it looks like with some decent quality behind it. So go ahead and click off. You're gonna click off there. It's gonna take away everything. Go back to your preview mode, and we'll go ahead and bring this back down to a lower subdivision. It's gonna make it a little easier. So anyway, going back up here, scroll document. This is going to be scrolling around your document. Your document size is going to change depending on what you're working on. Sometimes if you're working on like a full scene or something, you're going to want your document size to be bigger. So this just basically allows you to scroll around it. Not much to it. Zoom, same thing, self-explanatory. Zoom in and out of your document. Your actual button right here is going to give you the default resolution of your document. So you click that, it brings you back to your default resolution for the document size. AA half, anti-aliased half, click that. That brings you half your size, half the document size there, and it anti-aliases some of your lines also. We're going to go back to actual, keep it at the default resolution. It's the workable resolution for individual objects and stuff like that. Your perspective button here. Now this is going to basically put perspective distortion onto your object. When you first bring it into Zbrush, it's going to use the 2.5D paradigm, which is what Zbrush uses. Zbrush is not actual 3D in a sense. It's not actual 3D. It uses a 2.5D paradigm to allow you to basically bring your resolution up and bring all your polygons up to several million polygons and use that to sculpt in. It's a pretty complicated thing, but basically it just allows you to use that paradigm and create really high detailed stuff without taxing your hardware too much. So but anyway, when you bring it in, it's going to flatten it against the canvas. It's going to give you a more accurate look of what it's going to be useful for within ZBrush. It makes it able to be used with the tools in ZBrush more correctly, rather. But if you turn perspective on, you see how it warps that a little bit. Well, perspective on is what you're going to likely see if you were to export this and then bring it into another application or like a game engine or something. In one of those, you're going to have perspective distortion from your camera, and basically this just allows you to get a more accurate view of what it's going to look like, because if you have this off the whole time and you're sculpting, you're doing your thing, and then you go and export this, it's probably not going to look as close to this in your other application as it is to this. And that's going to depend more on the settings too in your other application. You can always change perspective distortion in your camera settings in another application, but this is going to give you an idea of what it's going to look like. So anyway, click floor. Floor basically turns on the grid. It gives you an idea sometimes too if you maybe if you move this guy off. Oop, has symmetry on. If you move this guy off the axis or something, and you have floor off, you're not really going to be able to tell. You know, maybe he's uncentered or something like that, and you won't really know, because this is important, because if he's uncentered and you turn on symmetry, you can see my red dot over here. It's not lined up, so symmetry is useless if he's not centered. So if you're worried about that, you can always turn on floor to see. You see you got your axes right here, so you'll know he's not centered. I'll show you how to do that a little later, recenter him. It's pretty easy, but we'll just bring him back here for now. Moving up next, you got your local transformations here, and local transformations in a nutshell is where your pivot is when you're moving or scaling or rotating. It's pretty simple actually. When you're rotating or scaling, you're going to do it from the center part here. Now, if you have local symmetry on with your local transformations, and let's use scale for instance, and here, let's quickly just mask out this part. Okay, and we'll turn off the mask so you don't see that. You can see here, if I were to rotate it, it's going to rotate around the center here. It's rotating around the center of the handle where I grabbed it. Okay. If I were to turn these off, it's going to rotate around the center of the object itself. Now, sometimes you'll want that, sometimes you won't. Maybe if you wanted to have him, let's just click off here. Maybe if you wanted to have him have like an elongated head or something. And click here. If you wanted to have him have like an elongated head, you would likely rotate it out from the center of the whole object, which you achieve by having those off. Sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. If you don't want that, you turn those on, and that rotates it around the pivot of where you have it selected. You're going to rotate around this handle, the center of this handle, and so that's going to give you a different result. Now, that's obviously not desirable what I was just doing there, but if you get the idea, it's going to basically give you the more control over where your rotations are centered around and how it deforms. Okay, and then you got your axes right here. You can turn these on and off at will to give yourself different results, of course. XYZ axis is on by default. That's going to rotate it around all axes if you need to do that. Or you can just turn on the Y axis, and that's going to give you a different kind of rotation. And then you turn on the Z axis, and that's going to give you a different kind of rotation. And this is your camera, by the way. This isn't this right here. I'm sorry if I showed you that, but this is your camera axes. Is that it? Rotates around. Okay. Anyway, moving to your next one here. Frame, fit mesh view. Pretty self-explanatory. You can also press F to do this. If you're out here, maybe this guy's a hulking monster or something like that, and you're working on stuff, or if you're working on a different subtool or something, or whatever reason you might have lost this particular subtool. Just hit F, brings him back into view. It frames him in this whole view. Or click that, either way. Move right here, you move the edited object. Oops. This just moves it around, and same thing as using the move tool, except you're just moving the object around. It's staying on its axis. You're not moving it away from its axis or anything like that. You move it around. It's moving the axis with it. This is more or less just moving your canvas around. Same idea. Scale, same thing. And rotate, of course, same thing. It's the same thing you're doing here. It's a lot easier to do it in here because obviously you're going to be interacting with your mesh, but those buttons are there if you need them. Polyframe, draw polyframe. Down here, this button right here. Draw polyframe turns on what the wireframe is. And I have him pretty low actually right now. He's already high res, so it's going to be, it looks very dense right now. But let's see if we can bring in something a little lower. We'll just bring in this default little star guy or whatever. Whenever you turn on polyframe, you can see it's going to have your wireframe in there. And you can see this one's a different color than this. And the reason for that is your polygroups. And basically what polygroups are is separate meshes. Meshes that are not merged by their vertices with each other. And if you have separate meshes or separate tools, they're all going to be a different color whenever you turn on polyframe. That just basically lets you know that they're separated into their own group. So if you were to merge meshes within Zbrush, it would put it into its own poly group. If you had one or if you had two or more meshes. And also, if you know where you're looking when you turn on polyframe, you can tell which spots are dense and which spots are spread out too far. That might need retopologized or something. Like for instance, if I were to use the move tool to stretch his topology out or something, maybe I wanted to give him like little teeth or something coming from his cheeks. I don't know why he would have teeth coming from his cheeks, but whatever. Turn on polyframe, you can see the topology is just all stretched out there. And obviously that's really not desirable, but there are several ways to fix that. They have the new option within Zbrush for R2. Starting from this, they have Dynamesh, and Dynamesh is really awesome. It actually retopologizes your entire mesh for you. So that's a really cool feature you can use. I won't be going over that until the later lesson, just because it's a specific tool and it's a new tool, so I really don't know it as well just yet, but I will be going over it in later tutorials. So let's get rid of all these guys right here. Alright, and that's not the rest of the sidebar. There's actually a couple more options. Unfortunately, my really crappy resolution, my really low resolution monitor is not allowing me to see the rest of this, just like my top bar here. So the other tool you're going to see down there, if you have a bigger monitor than me, which is much more likely, is the activate edit opacity. And by default, you see I just did that, it didn't do anything at all. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because there's only one subtool. So if I were to say append, bring in this other subtool here, you can see it has a transparency to it. And basically what this does is it's going to make this transparent to any sculpting or any texturing or anything else that you're doing to the mesh that's active. And it allows you to sculpt through that. Whereas if I had turned it off, which I can kind of do it down here, if I leave the opacity for it off, it's going to act like I'm texturing through this right now. Or not texturing, sculpting, excuse me. It's going to act like I'm sculpting through that right now, but if I turn it back on, then I can sculpt on the inside of that. So it's not blocking my brush from sculpting the skull here it's not blocking my brush anymore since it's invisible. That looks kind of creepy. But anyway, that's basically the sidebar right there. That's the right sidebar anyway. Alright, so now we're going to go over here to the left shelf here, explain this out a little more. This is your brush menu up here. Click on this button right here. It's going to open this up. This is your brush library. This is going to have all the brushes that are going to open up with ZBrush by default. Again, like I said, if you have a certain brush you want and looking for and it's not in here, you can always go to Lightbox and choose that from the brush menu. Okay, but for now we're just going to stick in here. This is going to show all your brushes. If you click on any of these, it's going to bring it up to your brush palette here, okay? Your quick pick brush palette, rather. And this is basically just your shelf of brushes that you've used throughout the scene, throughout the active scene. So any brush that you pick and you use in the scene at whatever time, it's going to appear up here. Simply put. Turn that off real fast. Okay, so click this again, and here's a good little trick to know. If you want to find a certain brush or something and you can't find it, I mean, this is kind of like a big shelf right here. Obviously you can't really see right off the bat what you're looking for. Nice little trick to know is to just enter the first key of the brush. If you know the name of the brush, enter the first key of that brush. So say for instance, if I'm looking for the Deco 1 brush, I'll just hit D and it's going to open up all the brushes with the D. Click that, I got that brush open. I'm good to go on that. Pretty nice little trick, so you don't have to wade through all these brushes here. So that's the brush menu right there. This is your stroke menu. This is going to control the stroke of your brush. And so if you turn Z out on, if you have it a certain way, obviously I have drag rectangle on right now. By default, your standard brush is going to have the dot stroke. If you turn on the drag rectangle, it'll do what it just did. It's going to drag something out from the middle. I know it says drag rectangle, but by default it's actually a soft circle, so it's not going to draw out a rectangle like it infers. But that's your that's what it does. It drags it out from the center, basically. Freehand, same thing as drag dots, pretty much. But this is going to be a smooth kind of stroke. Obviously you can see drag dots is a smooth stroke too. Well, the difference between them is that with drag dots, it's used for if you have like an alpha image or something up, it's used to draw tracks and other things like that, so that there's spacing between them, and you can set that stuff in your stroke palette up here actually whenever you need to. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but that's just so you know the difference between those two brushes. The color spray brush, it's going to give you a spray pattern, and this can be useful for like doing skin. If you use it with the right alpha or something, it can be useful for doing skin and other little details, scars and all that kind of stuff. Kind of interesting results with that. You got that, and then you also have your spray, which is pretty much the same thing, except that, especially in texturing, if you're texturing, the spray by itself is just going to give you one color. Well, the color spray, as it infers, is going to give you multiple colors, and that's between your swatches down here. So that's just going to depend on what result you want out of either of them. The drag dot, pretty self-explanatory. You're dragging a dot. Let's turn our intensity up. You drag a dot in. If you want to do holes or something, maybe you want holes in his head for whatever reason, you're going to drag that in there. Pretty self-explanatory, and that just drags it in there as a single entity, pretty much. Okay, so we'll switch back to the regular dots thing here. The alpha menu right here, this is going to open your alpha shelf library. Alphas are a very, very powerful tool in ZBrush. I don't know a lot of artists who don't use them. They're powerful for several reasons, because you can, for one, you can get in crazy amounts of detail if you have the right alpha and you use it right. You can also create your own alphas, and that allows you to be able to get custom shapes and custom detail and all that kinds of cool stuff. But alphas basically just allow you to mask in or sculpt in or color in detail, shapes, really specific stuff. And it's a very powerful thing to use in ZBrush, and you absolutely should know it if you're going to use ZBrush. But we'll get into that later. I got a whole section dedicated to that, and I'll explain all that stuff. Okay, your texture palette down here. Click that, your texture. This is your texture library here. If you want to texture onto the object, if you want to use color or something to texture onto them, you can just use that. You can select any of those textures right here. These are all defaults. Not really useful. I mean, I don't really know anyone who would like to draw jelly beans on their guy, but whatever. Gives you the idea of what it does. You can also import your own textures, of course, if you want to photo source. If you want to photo source an eyeball or something, I don't know, whatever reason, you can photo source your own stuff and get some pretty neat results from that too. So turn that off. And again, like I said, with all these, the quick pick shelf up top, same thing with your alpha menu. If you click on something in the bottom here and you use it actively in your scene, it's going to appear up here, and that just gives you a quick selection, so you don't have to keep wading through all this stuff. Okay, your material palette here. This is usually one of the first things people go into when they open ZBrush, because they just like messing with the materials. I mean, honestly, I can't blame them. It looks cool when you throw on a super ultra reflective material, look like T1000 or something, you know. It's just one of those things you can throw on your materials and get different views and different perspectives of how your model will look with these different materials. And materials are important, so keep that in mind. It's fun to mess with. But also, you can bake out your materials to your texture, and I'll show you how to do that a little later too. Pretty fun stuff. But once again, with that quick pick shelf, like I said, up there. So down here, got the color wheel, the color swatch, whatever you want to call it. And this is just going to allow you to jump between your colors here, just like any other editing program, image editing program. It's going to be like that. And you select whatever color you want, and you can see here that it's turning this. It's going to be turning this one right here a different color. Well, this is because it's a default shape. By default, I have no fill on this. I'll show you how to mess a little more with that later, but don't fret if your whole thing doesn't turn the color that you choose it right away, because there's a reason for that. But right now we're going to stick to what I was talking about, navigation. Worry about the luxuries of these a little later. Okay, and then you got your basic options in here. Again, we'll go over that. I just wanted to show you that the color wheel is here and that it works pretty much like any other color wheel. So, alright, and before we end this lesson, we'll go ahead and go across the top here. Very quickly, I'm just going to show you the important ones, because all of these other ones are very specific to their task, their purpose, and we'll go into those whenever we're discussing that in our later lessons. But the most important ones for navigating particularly, and for your documents, is right off the bat, document. This is your document menu that's basically tied to the canvas. Okay, and this is where a lot of people kind of make their first mistake with ZBrush, and I made the first mistake too. So when you go to your document palette, and say you made this really awesome sculpt or something right here, and you made something so cool, you worked hours on it. You don't want to lose it, obviously. So if you don't really know ZBrush, what you're likely going to do is go to Document and then Save As. And you see this little window pop up here, and this is your little warning right here. So if you ignore this, then that's on you. But this little warning right here basically says a tool is currently in edit transform mode, which it is, and we're in edit mode right now. And it says, would you like to save the document or save the active tool? Okay, well the difference here is the document is the canvas, the picture, okay? The document is not your 3D mesh. If you click save the document, you're going to save your document. You're going to save this as a picture, which is fine if you're working on a scene, an environment, or something like that. That's fine. Maybe you want a render of it. But that's not what you want if you want to save out your mesh. Your mesh is your tool. You save the tool if you want to save out and export your mesh. So you're going to save the tool, and you're just going to choose whatever you want, name it whatever you want, and then save it in here and click save. Okay? Again, I can't emphasize that enough. Know the difference between your document and between your tool, because I've seen a lot of people lose their work by not knowing the difference. Okay, so back here in document, you can click new document. That's going to obviously bring up a new document. Save your document. This is going to save it in its own format. If you click save, once again it's going to say that we're just going to say save the document this time. Say we're intentionally saving the document. ZBR is the extension for that. That's your ZBrush document. That's what it's going to save as, so you can reopen it in ZBrush again, or you can export, and that's going to save it as a PSD. And you have a couple other options. You have your bitmap and you have your TIFF files. I usually just save them as PSD if I really want to, and then just convert them through Photoshop. And then of course import and save is going to have the same idea, just respective to their file extensions. Now down here we got the same basic options that we did on the sidebar, so we don't really have to go over those. I already went over those with you. This is going to be your document borders and your document colors. If you want the background to be a different color, then you can just choose that, and you can click whatever you have in the palette at the time, the current active color. If we want it as the background, then we'll just have it selected, and then we'll go to document, and then we'll click back, and that changes the background color. Now we have a gradient on right now. That's what this background gradient range is. So that's just going to be the difference with the gradient. And you can set that to your own preference. This down here, this is your document size, your document resolution. You can set the width and size. This is kind of also dependent on the resolution of your screen, because it might cause some really bad anti-aliasing if we make it too big or too small. And so it's probably best to just leave this at default size, especially if you just beginning, you don't really know too much about what you're doing just yet. Just leave it at default size, and you could mess with that a little more later and figure it out. Well, we won't worry about this stuff. This is more in-depth stuff. Go ahead and just close out that document real fast. Next we'll go over to edit here. Edit is pretty self-explanatory, your undos and your redos. You're allowed up to a certain amount. It depends on what you set it as. You can set that over here in the preferences palette, and you could set that. You would think you would set it under the edit menu, but it's not going to be under here. Okay, it's not under the edit menu. It's going to be under the memory menu, because this is in direct relation to your random access memory, your RAM, and it's going to be a very memory intensive program. If you don't have enough memory, then it's going to run pretty slowly likely. But you can tell this right here in the memory menu. You can tell it how much memory to allocate to the program, and then you can also set your undos, and by default it's set at 4, which is really not a lot. You can set it as high or as low as you want. just keep in mind that what you set it at is going to affect how much memory the program is using. And by default also, just let you know that the tool itself, depending on which one you have selected, is going to have its own set of undos and redos. The whole thing is not going to have its own set of undos and redos. So if I were to have this tool selected and I made some changes to it or something, and then I go over here and I select this tool, it's not gonna undo what I just did to this tool because I don't have that one selected. I have to select this one. It has its own set of undos and redos that I just use. Okay, and then real quick here, I'll show you with this materials like we had down there. We have the material menu up top. It's the same basic palette, but instead down here, if you click modifiers, this gives you a whole set of modifiers that you can use to edit this material. If you want a specular highlight, or if you want something to look sharper or duller, we got the specular down here, we want it to be sharper or duller, maybe shiny or whatever. You can set that from the material palette in the modifiers menu. We'll get more in depth with that later, but just show you real fast what exactly it did. Okay, and as far as that goes, that's pretty much the entire interface. For basic functions, there are a lot of advanced functions that I didn't really go over. I did that on purpose, but we're going to get into a lot of things real in depth, and we're going to get into the menus specific to their tasks real in depth and everything. So if you just go ahead and go to the next lesson, we'll get started with the geometry menu, and we'll probably get sculpting. So moving on. Okay, so that's pretty much the entire interface, aside from the advanced functions and all the other stuff, and there are a lot of them, but we'll go a little more in depth with them. But this is basically just the basic functions that you're going to need to know, get your feet off the ground, and get you familiarized with the program. If I used any terminology or any other things, techniques or anything like that, if I move through it too fast, don't worry about it. We're really going to get into depth with the certain things that I showed you. I just wanted to give you a really basic overview of the program. So no, don't worry if you weren't able to keep up just yet. But from there, we'll go ahead and move into the geometry menu as our next lesson, and we'll go ahead and do that and keep going from there.